Welcome to this explainer. Let's dive right into a really fascinating biological mystery that starts at the microscope and ends with a high-stakes clinical warning. We're going to explore the intricate relationship between two vital nutrients, how they build the very DNA inside the human body, and the catastrophic failures that happen when our cellular factories run out of supplies. It's a story of microscopic proportions, but the real-world consequences for patients are absolutely massive. Here is our investigative roadmap for today. First, we have the megaloblastic anemia mystery. Second, the building blocks of DNA. Third, the 5-step B12 journey. Fourth, contrasting sources and storage. And finally, the critical clinical warning. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the megaloblastic anemia mystery. Imagine looking through a microscope and seeing that the red blood cells are abnormally giant. Normally, a red blood cell is a neat, biconcave disc, right? It's perfectly designed to squeeze through tiny microscopic capillaries to deliver oxygen everywhere in the body. But here, the cells are swollen, oval-shaped, and totally immature. A cell this large really struggles to navigate the bloodstream and is prone to early destruction. This prompts an immediate, glaring question. What exactly went wrong in the cellular factory to produce such oversized, dysfunctional anomalies? Well, the answer is megaloblastic anemia, which is fundamentally a problem of asynchronous maturation. Think of it kind of like building a car on an assembly line where the chassis just keeps getting bigger and bigger, but the engine never actually gets installed. The cell's cytoplasm keeps growing, happily making proteins and RNA as if everything is perfectly normal. But the nucleus, which holds the DNA, the actual engine of the cell, cannot mature because DNA synthesis has completely ground to a halt. The end result is a massive, unfinished product known as a macrocyte. Looking at the laboratory features, things get really specific and vivid. On a complete blood count, the mean corpuscular volume, or MCV, which measures the average size of red blood cells, will be abnormally high, typically well over 100 femtoliters. Then, on a blood smear, we see those large oval macrocytes appearing right alongside hypersegmented neutrophils. Those are white blood cells that have bizarrely fractured into 6 or more nuclear loaves instead of the usual 3 or 4. Add in a low reticulocyte count, which means that the bone marrow is failing to release new, healthy cells, and the clinical mystery only deepens. Moving on to section 2, building blocks of DNA. Let's look at the molecular mechanism. To understand why these cells get so big, we have to look at the assembly line. The bone marrow is a highly proliferative tissue, tasked with making hundreds of billions of red blood cells every single day. Each new cell requires a perfect, complete copy of DNA, and that copying process absolutely needs a nucleotide called thymidine. Now, making thymidine relies on a specific active form of folate. But here is the catch. Folate cannot do its job alone. It relies heavily on vitamin B12 to stay active. This brings us to a fascinating biological roadblock known as the methyl trap. Basically, vitamin B12 acts as the crucial key to unlock folate. B12 drives a reaction that processes homocysteine, and in doing so, it regenerates the active form of folate. If vitamin B12 is missing, folate becomes securely trapped in a totally useless, inactive methyl state. Even if dietary folate is incredibly plentiful, the cellular factory simply runs out of the active materials needed to copy DNA. And this perfectly explains the mechanism behind those giant, unfinished megaloblasts. The cytoplasm factory is fully operational, continuously building up the bulk of the cell and getting ready to divide. But the nucleus is stuck at a glaring red light. Without the active folate needed to make DNA, the cell can grow, but it simply cannot divide, leaving it perpetually trapped in an oversized state. Let's move to section 3, the 5-step B12 journey. Unlike most nutrients that are easily absorbed, getting vitamin B12 into the bloodstream is a highly coordinated 5-step relay race. First, in the stomach, acid releases B12 to bind to an R protein. Second, the stomach's parietal cells manufacture intrinsic factor, or IF. Third, down in the duodenum, enzymes break down that R protein, allowing B12 to bind to the intrinsic factor. Fourth, this new complex travels all the way to the ileum, where specific cubilin receptors finally absorb it. And fifth, it's transported into the blood by Cobalamin 2. A dropped baton at any single point results in complete deficiency. For example, in pernicious anemia, an autoimmune attack destroys the stomach's parietal cells, halting intrinsic factor production and stopping the entire race at step 2. Now, section 4, contrasting sources and storage. Let's compare these two vital workers. We see a massive dichotomy in how humans source these essential vitamins.
Vitamin B12 is synthesized exclusively by microorganisms, meaning it's only naturally found in animal products like meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. So, strict vegan diets lack B12 entirely unless supplemented. Folate, however, derives its name from the Latin word for leaf, folium, and is abundant in green leafy veggies, liver, and fortified grains. And while B12 needs that crazy relay race all the way down to the terminal ileum, folate is absorbed much more simply, right early on in the proximal jejunum.
Check out this number, 3 to 5. That represents the amount of years, yes, years, that vitamin B12 can be stored inside the human liver. It's an absolutely extraordinary timeline for a water-soluble vitamin, and it completely alters how these deficiencies actually play out. This stark storage contrast is a critical medical reality. Folate stores only last 3 to 4 months, meaning a supply can crash super fast from a poor diet or physiological stress, like pregnancy. Conversely, the liver acts like a dragon guarding a tiny pile of gold with its B12. It meticulously hoards its 2 to 5 milligrams. Because of this tightly guarded reserve, a B12 absorption failure might remain totally hidden for 3 to 5 years before the supply runs out and symptoms finally appear. Which brings us to our climax, Section 5, the critical clinical warning.
This is a non-negotiable golden rule of medicine pulled directly from clinical texts. Always check vitamin B12 status before treating a megaloblastic anemia with folate. When a lab reveals giant, immature red blood cells, the immediate temptation might be to just give folate to rapidly restart DNA synthesis. But doing that blindly is incredibly dangerous, and the reason why is absolutely chilling.
Here is the deal. While a folate deficiency simply halts the blood factory and causes anemia, a vitamin B12 deficiency brings an additional, terrifying consequence. B12 is absolutely essential for maintaining myelin, the protective lipid insulation around our nerves. A lack of B12 literally strips the insulation off sensory nerves and the spinal cord, causing subacute combined degeneration. We're talking profound numbness, devastating weakness, and a complete inability to walk. If a clinician attempts to fix the blood with folate without checking B12 levels first, they inadvertently hide an ongoing neurological disaster. The immense influx of folate forces the bone marrow to bypass the B12 trap. The anemia vanishes, and the blood smear looks absolutely perfect. But because the brain and spinal cord are still completely starving for B12, the nerve damage quietly and silently continues, progressing until the destruction is completely permanent and irreversible. So it leaves us with a provocative question. When viewing a lab result, are we merely treating a blood cell, or are we treating the whole patient? It's a huge reminder that seeing the bigger picture is what ultimately saves lives. A high MCV on a blood test isn't just a number. It's a profound molecular cry for help. Understanding this intricate biological dance between vitamins, cellular factories, and our fragile nervous system is exactly how catastrophic medical outcomes are permanently avoided. Thanks for joining us to unpack this fascinating explainer.